Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Jesse James Fain, introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers at home, because this is your first solo interview with us.
Yeah, first solo interview pretty much, period, which is awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse James Fain. I am a sci-fi, fantasy, urban fantasy, and mill sci-fi author. I write what I would call martial tales, which is anything to do with the fight, be it fist, blade, gun, or otherwise. And I specialize in revenge tales and stories of people getting back what they deserve, or giving someone what they deserve.
Okay. What made that as your theme of choice?
Part of it was the quality of the stories that have that particular theme in them. I love The Count of Monte Cristo as a kid, but it's also something that prevails in most of the as a sub theme, I guess is the best way to put it, in most of the fantasy and sci-fi that I really enjoyed. I feel like all the major big names, Lord of the Rings and Dune, they all have some version of that. Dune was another really influential one there. The original book with Paul taking back his rights as the Atreides heir.
Okay. All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first found them. So I actually found Jesse. I found Jesse through Three Ravens Publishing when we did an open call for episodes, and he jumped in, and he's been back a lot because he volunteers for everything. So with that out of the way, we've got to ask you the religion questions, because this is your first solo interview. Are you ready?
I believe I am.
All right. Enemy Mine, The Last Starfighter, or Independence Day?
To upset a lot of Gen X, I have to go with Independence Day. Independence Day was definitely a favorite as a kid. Will Smith punching an alien in the face and saying "Welcome to Earth" was absolutely on brand for me and mine. So that's definitely my pick.
Okay, there was no wrong answer. I liked all the movies. So, all right. And because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters Blades podcast, the 13th Warrior, the Eagle, or Beowulf and Grendel?
Ooh. Again, another good set. Got to go 13th Warrior. I love the mix of Beowulf and Ibn Fadlan's Into Darkness, how they combine the two. I think that Crichton didn't always do as good a job as maybe some people gave him credit for, but did in fact always do a good job. And the prayer, "Lo there do I see my father, lo there do I see my mother," definitely hits home.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sentiment. I know that it isn't like an actual Viking prayer. If they'll be like, "Oh, that's not historically accurate," I do think it captures the sentiment pretty well, though.
Yeah.
Of Viking culture.
Yeah, definitely not authentic, but definitely hits the feelings.
In fact, when I wrote a prayer into my book, The Reservist, I actually kind of like let that be part of the inspiration, because it was, I see a fantasy or sci-fi, but it was a prayer that was made up for his religion, his people, and that was kind of the inspiration, because it really, as far back as the Vikings and the Romans, kind of worshiping our ancestors, or paying respect to what came before us is kind of part of human nature, I think.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I really like that one. Although Beowulf and Grendel is classic, I really enjoyed that story. I've read it. I've watched several versions of it. It never gets old. It's a classic for a reason. And the Eagle, I know people get the Roman historians like, oh, shit all over it. They're like, "Oh, that's not accurate, and they used testudo wrong," and but it was cool, so I'll give them a pass.
Yeah, it's very difficult for everybody to be the Northman. That takes a lot of work, a lot of research, and having experts on hand. And even then, you still don't get some things right.
Yeah, and it's just like, The one thing that everyone's like, you wouldn't use this is a lot of the armchair generals, they're quoting tactics by the book and in perfect situations. And sometimes you've got to make the best of a bad situation. And there is no good answer. They're just the first answer you come to get something going. Like the worst decision is no decision. So like, oh, you wouldn't use they get on like Gladiator. You wouldn't use Cav in the forest. If that's all you got to skirmish quickly, you sure as hell will. It's not ideal, absolutely right there. But I mean, you do what you got to do. You don't just say, well, the book says no, so we're just going to let them flank us.
Yeah, right. I taught MMA for several years. Basically for self-defense when you didn't have anything else. And one of the first things I always told students was move. It doesn't matter how. It doesn't matter which way. Move. And that's a very similar principle. It's sometimes you just got to make do with what you got.
Anybody that's done kind of close quarters combat training for real as opposed to the rules-based stuff you'll do in competition knows that the only fair fight is the one you win.
Amen.
And so like there's some songs that came out of my generation of the Global War on Terror. That was one of the things they talked about. You got to lose all those morals, those ethics to kill more efficiently. Because realistically, like sometimes it's just you got to make the best of a bad situation. It's you or them, and that means you might not follow the book exactly. And obviously, I'm not justifying war crimes, but like the idea that you're going to critique something because they didn't use the ideal battlefield. That's one of the reasons when it comes to writing, like I try to outline the terrain before I start the book, and then wherever I am when the battle starts, I have to make the tactics fit the terrain. Because otherwise, Absolutely. The temptation is to have every battle look like Thermopylae or every battle is the Alamo. And quite frankly, they stand out because they're so rare. And so, like, sometimes the terrain just, like, got to make the best of it,
Yeah. Well, and if you have a last stand, you don't keep main characters long.
No, not at all. They called them Forlorn Hopes for a reason, right?
Right.
Like, you're not expected. That's why you got such good prizes if you won, because it's a suicide mission. So yeah, they get on. That was the last Pathfinder. Have you seen that one?
Yes.
They get on that one for the tactics too, but I mean, it was a good tale. Like sometimes the story needs trump 100% historical accuracy when you're talking like fantasy, historical alternative history, right? Although I don't know if you could entirely call it historical, like alt history anymore, because now we know the Vikings actually did live here and they had expeditions. So the idea that Christopher Columbus was the first European to come here, we kind of know it's not true anymore. He wasn't even the first or the only. Right. So it's interesting. I'm not sure how they'll class the last Pathfinder anymore, but yeah, it's one of those ones where they get them on the tactics, and for me, it's the sentiment is better. Like get the vibe, the kind of the culture is a little bit more important. So.
Absolutely. Well, and real, especially swords, real sword fights don't look good on camera. That's a thing that's been known for a while because they're very fast and they're done almost immediately. Or somebody always makes some kind of weird mistake. And the movements are very direct. They're very forward, and they don't look pretty. There's not these big, beautiful slashes. That's part of the reason why I write.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it is, I mean, if you're talking broadsword against a man in plate armor, okay, yeah, that battle might last a little bit, at least until somebody runs out of juice. But with swords, at least, they were most people fought with pikes. I mean, even in, not 1600 because we had gunpowder, but even as far as the late Middle Ages, like the average fighter had a sharp, pointy stick, not that far from what Cain and Abel had, right? Because it was flexible, it kept the enemy at a distance. It lasted because it makes sense.
Well, and pikemen lasted well into combined arms. Gustavus Adolphus, the father of one of the fathers of modern warfare of combined arms, definitely used pikemen. So even 1632, the 100 Years' War, their spears still remain king. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
And then the other part of that is even when we had the first riflemen, I think were they called fusiliers? Is that the first ones where they had the weapon that they put on a stick to hold it in place because it was so heavy it almost had its own little tripod. It was like the Dutch had them. And, even those were protected by pikemen to protect them while they reloaded.
Yep.
And Yeah, right. And to keep the enemy at bay, and God help them if it rains because the wick gets wet and it's all over. I could just see it now, sir. We got to stop the war. Why? It's raining. The weather is a funny and fickle thing when it comes to combat. I mean, it's such a thing that. Are you familiar with the chaplain that got the Silver Star for the Battle of the Bulge from Patton, or was it the Battle of the Bulge? I think so. Patton famously gave a chaplain a Silver Star because he wanted the weather to change, and he told the chaplain to pray. Nothing happened, so he went to another chaplain and told him to pray. He wanted better weather to keep fighting, and the next day the weather cleared, and he gave the chaplain a Silver Star for his prayer.
I had not heard that one, but that sounds about on brand for that.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up and see if I find it. I'll put it in the show notes. But it was definitely. I'll find the Wikipedia link or something so you can all read about it. But yeah, he definitely gave a chaplain a Silver Star for a prayer that had the weather change because that's totally the reason the weather changed. The prayer. Like, why didn't we think of just doing a rain dance?
Hey, it worked for us sometimes playing football. We had a rain turtle. We'd draw a rudimentary turtle in the grass and the dirt with our cleats, and everybody would spit in it and hobble around it. And, sometimes it worked.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess we did it wrong. We just played in the rain when I was playing rugby.
Oh, it didn't stop practice. It just cooled it off from it being, I'm a Georgia boy, 96-degree heat with 110% humidity. Anything that would put that sun away would help.
Yeah. All right. And so you've answered the favorite dinosaur a couple times, favorite zoo animal a couple times. So we're going to mix it up for you. What is your favorite sci-fi weapon?
My favorite sci-fi weapon? I can't claim the concept as original, but there was, I believe it was War's Edge, which I believe was written by Ryan. I can't remember his last name. But the War's Edge series has a plasma weapon that still has a core-based projectile. So you're firing a true, rifle round, but the rifle round ignites with a plasma reaction after it's out of the barrel. And I absolutely love that. I use that in Children of Fire. So sorry, Ryan, I pulled an idea. You'll have to forgive me. But I think that is definitely the coolest form of sci-fi weapon. Though I do have a soft spot for the smart guns in Alien as well. Looking like the MG42/34s with sonar and the big rig attached. I always thought those were really cool when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, rule of cool and functionality aren't always the same. Like the gun in Aliens, like it looks cool. I'll grant anybody that. But the only problem with it is, I mean, if you look how big it is, like how would you maneuver that?
Oh, you don't, and you don't use it in the close quarters of a spaceship.
Right.
Absolutely not. It didn't make a lick of sense. The flamethrower made a lot more sense, but
when it comes to fighting in a spaceship, like one of the big things you got to learn, especially since none of them were wearing like full bodysuits that are like encompassed everything spacesuit style, is if you poke a hole with your bullet in the side of the ship, that's bad. Explosive
bad day. It's a real bad day.
Someone's gonna have a really bad day. And so it's one of those things where you just hope you're on the right side of the emergency door shut because otherwise you're fucked.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're screwed. I'll try to remember my language. All right. So what's your favorite fantasy weapon?
So that's a difficult one because there's a lot of really cool fantasy weapons. I think the first one that pops to mind though is from Wizard's First Rule, Terry Goodkin, The Sword of Truth.
Okay.
But aside from being just a really good, well-designed sword, once you attune to the sword and once the main character, Richard, once he goes through the series, the sword awakens the memories and kind of spirit of all the wielders before it and capitalizes on all of their fighting experiences. So once he got probably 3 or 4 books in, Richard could tap into the fighting experience of thousands of years of his spiritual successors as the Seeker, as the wielder of the Sword of Truth.
Yeah, and you had the Mort Sith, which were kind of cool. And if you saw the TV version, I mean, I'm just saying. If you know, you know. I'm just saying. More to say.
Yeah.
Look it up. Do yourself a favor. If you're just do yourself a favor. Look it up. But yeah, I really liked Terry Goodkin. His later books, he got really preachy. I'm like, I get it. You're a libertarian. You like Ayn Rand. I do too. Read the books. But, I mean, it's also not the Bible. Like, I don't believe it absolutely. I guess Bible's not because I didn't. Anyway, but it's like sometimes he got a little preachy. I'm like, come on, Terry, just tell a good story. Let's kill people. We're okay. We don't need to preach. But I really did dig that series. I like the TV adaptation. I know it didn't get a lot of love and it didn't get a lot of seasons, but I really did dig it. I'm a lot more forgiving, I think, than most when it comes to movie and film adaptations. I'm just happy to see something I like, and I'll accept that sometimes you got to make changes for the medium. Because, like, obviously, just because it works in a book doesn't always mean you can write that into a script. Because how the heck are you going to get this magical thing to appear on screen, right? Like, how are you generate it? Although I guess with green screens, you could do a lot more than you used to when it comes to monsters.
Yeah, well, and I think budget is what limits that now. I think some of the more modern movies, or if you're into anime, when the Final Fantasy movies came out, that were 100% CGI. Once we pass that point, it's capable. It's just whether you want to pay for it or not. Game of Thrones suffered from that. They had to make changes purely because of budget, not because of any lack of capability. But there are certain things I think come out better as an animated series. People talk about Red Rising all the time and doing a Red Rising series. I don't know how you're going to do 8-foot people with extra fingers that have extra organs. Same thing with Space Marines when they do that finally for Warhammer. Like, you're probably just better off animating it.
Well, with Warhammer, there's ways that you could build the suits because somebody did it at a con. Oh yeah, where they just basically built it almost like on a raised platform boot kind of deal. You need someone who's a little bit tall anyway. You could do it, but it'd probably get really pricey to get those suits outfitted and to get enough of them and find enough tall people. Because, dudes over 6 feet are a minuscule, like less than, was it 5-10%, something crazy? I don't know. It's not a lot.
Yeah, there's not much
as far as the general population. So it gets difficult. Or just hope for Engels or your friend. So, okay. But yeah, I do love all that in there. So, all right. And finally, because we are the Blasters Blaze podcast and we are sponsored by the Coffee Brand Coffee Company, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
So, now I'm not a good person to ask this question. I have a really interesting relationship with coffee that stems from my family. I grew up in a family that suffers from substance abuse, and that meant that everybody drank a whole lot of coffee to not be evil in the morning. So I've purposely dodged it. I won't do coffee unless I'm about to die. So tea is definitely my answer. And generally as cold and sweet as possible.
That is an acceptable answer from the South. Yeah, I like diabetes in a cup. I mean, sweet Southern iced tea. Unfortunately, like I do have to worry about the weight. What's that they say? You want to be airborne, you got to be thin. I'm working. My goal is to see if I can fit back into my dress uniform. Not that I ever would. I'd have no reason to ever wear it again. But it'd be kind of cool to know that I could.
No, absolutely.
So I've been on that path, and so like as much as I like my diabetes in a cup, I got a pass on it most of the time. Although I make an exception when I go to Mission Barbecue because you just something about sweet tea and barbecue. Like you just can't.
It's required almost.
It's like peanut butter and jelly, right? You got to do it.
Absolutely.
So, although I know some people that get weird with their peanut butter and they mix it with other things.
Are you honey? Yeah, I'll stand up for peanut butter and honey, especially if you're out of jelly.
I've seen people do peanut butter in the marshmallow. Peanut butter and banana. I've seen peanut butter and maple syrup. All of those are okay. It's so dang sweet.
Yeah.
My tolerance for sugar is not what it used to be since I've cut back.
Right. It makes a difference once you're not used to it anymore.
So, okay. So obviously you've been on the show, so you've talked a lot, about the things that interest you. But what we haven't heard from you is how you got into writing and nerd stuff.
Okay, yeah, I can tell that one. It's kind of a stages thing, right? Because everybody's at different layers of nerd stuff. So I grew up in a very creative family. My love affair with martial arts and with novels starts very early. My grandfather on my mom's side was a very religious reader. And so I was probably about, I don't know, 10 when he handed me a box that was chock full of, it had the first three Dune, all of Lord of the Rings, Robin Hobb. It was literally like an entire moving box stacked all the way to the top with novels. At the same time, I came from a karate family. Both my grandmother and my mother taught for Kim Brothers, which, if you're from the South, especially Georgia, you've seen their schools all over the place. And my dad loved Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We didn't watch football in my house. We watched MMA. We watched, literally, I remember UFC 3. I was about 4 years old. And so that's what we watched instead of football. And then I was reading all that. And that all kind of coalesced into going up to the comic book shop one Saturday and seeing a game of D&D. It was third edition at the time. Third edition is my start with Dungeons and Dragons. But to have a Dungeons and Dragons game, you had to have a story. And you had to write one. You had to make one up. And don't get me wrong, my improvisation skills are quite good after years and years of practice. But if you don't have a baseline, you're not going to have a very good story. And so I jumped in, and my grandmother would drop me off every Saturday night for years for me to pile in with all the older kids and play Dungeons and Dragons. So that's what I did. And eventually that became me wanting to do what all these people had done. Books gave me an escape, and they gave me heroes that I maybe didn't always see emulated or couldn't always see emulated in real life. So put all that together, and I finally decided one day to get real serious about it and start writing.
And when was that you decided to get serious and start writing?
So I tried to write in college, but I was writing college papers. My degree's in government, so I was writing a lot about private military companies and systems of government and things like that. I attempted to write a novel then. I was not ready to write the novel I was trying to write. I just wasn't good enough yet. Great concept. My prose and stuff was terrible. So I wrote fan fiction like many people do. I wrote in role-playing guilds online when I couldn't play D&D in person. I wrote that for years, and it wasn't until probably, let's see, about a year and a half ago that I really decided, I'm going to buckle down and I am going to do this. And it's going to be for real. And that's when I really got serious and started devoting time every single day, no matter what, to the craft.
Okay. And when did you decide to take that dedication and take it to a more professional, I'm trying to sell my stories route?
So when you decide to be a writer, you often have to make choices. The business is very busy. There's a lot going on. And so you can submit to the slush pile, and the slush pile may take years for someone to even look at your stuff before they tell you no. So one of the really cool things that you can do, any burgeoning writers out there, is you can go look for open calls. And open calls are people asking specifically for something by a certain date, and you get much better turnaround. People actually will, tell you, hey, I want this or I don't, and they'll tell you exactly what they want, which is kind of a struggle as an author. So I decided, after meeting some of the publishers and things like that at Dragon Con, to take a look around and see these open calls and do some short stories to practice and get better. And one of those open calls was eventually called Contested Landing, but it was asking for drop trooper stories, which, for anyone not familiar, is going to be like your Halo ODSTs or your Starship Trooper style orbital insertions from space to the planet to fight. And I absolutely love that concept. And so I decided, after seeing this open call, and having wanted to write something like that for a while, that I would. And that was my first successfully accepted and published story. It's called Children of Fire, and it's in Contested Landing Volume 1.
Wow, I didn't realize that was your first public story.
Yep.
So if let me throw you the cover up on that one real quick.
Yeah, of course.
So this is one that Hillbilly William Joseph Roberts approached me. They were looking to get stories that were, I mean, the anthology's out, but they needed someone to manage it. So they did, well, we'll call them J.R. Handley Presents. I'll cover the cover cost, because that's one of the reasons, to streamline budgets and stuff. I was looking at taking a hiatus on my own anthologies over at Bayonet Books. And so I put this one out, and it was a lot of fun. I absolutely love the Halo ODST lore, like the Feet First into Hell. There's something about that speaks to me. I really dig it. The cover art's pretty awesome. Yeah, so it's cool. So what is it for you that makes that concept resonate with you?
So my minor's history, and I'm a big war nerd, war buff. And on top of that, who I refer to as my brother, my best friend since we were, 11 years old, he dove straight into the military out of high school. And so between studying the military in school, really loving military history, and his personal experiences, I grew to really love reading the stories of heroism and honestly brutality that come off of the modern battlefield. A lot of people in the modern age, heroes, they're not like they are in books. There's no knights in shining armor anymore. But there's still people that are out there risking their lives for the people next to them every single day. And that really resonated with me. For the drop troopers specifically, it's a amazing evolution of the airborne concept. But on top of that, you are still keeping kind of what I would call the quintessential infantry things. Like, we are still dropping in and having a personal fight. We're not worrying about the tanks and everything like that. I don't count power armor the same way. It's still a soldier or Marine or whatever classification of warfighter you want to file them under. They're still doing warfighter things. They're still using handheld weaponry or weaponry that's attached to their body, bombing in and getting straight into the fight. And that scramble really stood out to me as well. The fact that there's no time to plan. There's no setting the stage. There's no battle lines. You just drop straight in, feet first into hell, like you said, and go at it.
Okay. We got a lot of really good stories in that one. It was a lot of fun to write. But you obviously wrote your Children of Fire story. So let's start there. Like, what is that? Well, you know what? Before we do that, we're going to have this anthology sponsor this episode. So let me read you the blurb of that anthology, and then we'll dive into your story and then the world that came from it. So, Contested Landing Anthology. Buckle up for an explosive ride into the heart of the battle with Contested Landing, the ultimate anthology of military science fiction that'll leave you on the edge of your seat. Get ready to dive headfirst into the fray as fearless defenders clash with relentless invaders in heart-pounding action across the cosmos, from pulse-pounding firefights to jaw-dropping heroics. These adrenaline-fueled tales will thrust you into the heart of interstellar conflict like never before. So, grab your gear, lock and load, and prepare for an epic showdown where the fate of the worlds hangs in the balance. Are you ready to join the fight? Dun, dun, dun. I clearly need to work on my radio announcer voice, but, what are you going to do? So that's the anthology. It's a collection of, action scenes, because obviously, everyone's going to call it heroic unless you're actually the ones there. But action scenes involving, coming to combat in a, space to orbit kind of, or technically you could call it an orbital insertion if you're, well, no, it wouldn't be orbital if you're not going into orbit. I was going to say ship to ship would not be considered orbital insertion. So definitely like ship to planet, think, paratroopers just jumping from space instead.
Yep.
But so that's the anthology. That is the open call that said, hey, I want to write a story for that. So how did that creation of that story for you, and then the world that you said you've already started writing in from that?
Yeah, so writing, I think, for almost anybody, or creating, is an amalgamation of all the things that you've experienced before, plus your favorites or your own take on things. So I sat down to really just try and put all of the things together that I absolutely loved about this subgenre, but also about kind of all things military, the things that I'd seen or read about, and my brother's personal experiences, even the stories that him and his friends tell when they get home. So I don't know how many fans of Starship Troopers we're going to have here, but if you've seen the So Bad It's Good movie version that doesn't really do the book justice, you're going to be familiar with Rico and Dizzy. Well, to spoil a 20-something-year-old movie at this point that I saw in theaters when I was probably 7 and shouldn't have, Dizzy is made female from being male in the book, and Rico and Dizzy have a relationship, and it ends very quickly with her death. And they seem kind of, destined for each other, like that was always supposed to happen. They were best friends. But Dizzy is killed at the outpost, and they don't ever really get a chance. So my basic premise of Children of Fire is giving a spiritual Rico and Dizzy their second chance. And so that's kind of where I started.
So it's a love story too?
It is. It's a very action-packed love story, but and this will tie into more of my brother's experiences, and basically, Atlas, my main character, he's reached the point where he's becoming tired of war. He's fought through his 20s. He's getting to the point where he's starting to look beyond service. And this happens for every serviceman at some point, whether they put their 20 in or they don't. Eventually, some point, the wear and tear on your body, the forgive me for this one, bureaucratic bullshit that everybody will know so well, it all piles up, and you're like, man, there's got to be life after this. And so Atlas has hit that point, and his one of the corporals that serves in his platoon, Corsica, is his love interest. Is they're best friends. They do really well, and his world is more and more coming down to what's going to happen after this. Are we going to have a life together after this? What can we do? But he hasn't expressed those feelings. And then they get the call and they have to suit up. And now with this kind of revelation settling in, not only does he have to get everyone home purely because they're his battle brothers, he has to get everyone home because these are the people that he's going to spend the next part of his life with, because these are the only friends he has, the only loves he has, not just Corsica, but everybody. So that's a big premise in Children of Fire. The initial short story was almost a novella. It was almost long enough to be a novella. Is that not only now am I fighting to protect the people next to me because they are in the same uniform, I'm fighting because these are the people I love and I want to spend the rest of my peaceful life with too.
Okay, so without spoilers, obviously this is the story's Children of Fire is this combat, this action that the one short story. What is the world you created off of that?
So I'm just going to simply call it the Children of Fire universe, but it kind of follows the chronicle of what I refer to as the Gaussian Republic after a Gauss rifle, another great sci-fi weapon that comes up often. And it is meant to be a plausible but different, I don't want to call it near future, semi-near future. And it's meant to take a different approach to kind of what Halo and some of the other big sci-fi series do, which is we always end up with this one world government that Earth unites and then spreads out into the stars, and everybody's under some form of the UN. You see that super often. I didn't like that. I don't think that fits with how humanity is. I think if we do that, we'll probably all find a way to kill each other before we ever really make it off this rock. So the Gaussian Republic is mainly based around Mars. It still has lands on Earth. And there's other empires and republics of humanity, but they all kind of decided, hey, the best thing for us is to head out in different directions. So once a plausible version of Faster Than Light's discovered, I'm not nerding out on Faster Than Light, y'all. I'm not writing hard sci-fi. Sorry. I know there's plenty of people that love it. I don't have the patience to actually make sure everything's right, and I'm a government and history guy, not a physicist. So once everybody spreads out, they start encountering hostile alien life, including the Marsillian Empire, the fish heads, who are my main bad guy in Children of Fire, who you will see through a lot of the beginning of the story. Not all of Children of Fire, but in the novel that's coming and in several of the short stories as well. They are from basically a planet that the entire planet only has small islands, and so they are a amphibious people inspired by Lovecraft's deep ones. So I often tell people Children of Fire is Halo ODSTs fighting Lovecraftian horrors on a Dr. Seuss planet.
That is one hell of an intro. I kind of like it. And so if you wonder why you laughed, I threw up, if you're listening, not watching, I threw up a banner that says a fellow Handwavium University alumni, because I clearly graduated from there as well. I do not do the maths. I too was a history major for a reason. And so where does the Dr. Seuss angle comes in? Are you trying to imply that it's cartoonish or?
No, that's so when so Pegasus 4, the planet that a bunch of this happens on, is 100% inspired. The way it looks is inspired by growing up with Dr. Seuss. It's all purples and oranges. It is literally a source of, I don't want to call it post-traumatic stress, but it's a source of unnervement for my Republican orbital commandos, because if you grew up in, around Earth or Mars or a human terraformed planet, grass is supposed to be green, not bright orange or deep purple. It's just not supposed to be that color. Everybody talks about, Kentucky bluegrass and how beautiful and strange it is. It throws people off when you see it for the first time. And that's the whole planet. The apex predator on the planet is a leopard-sized bullfrog with fangs. There's all kinds of things that are just meant to be, if we find planets with water and life, if we find planets that are habitable, not only are they rare, but the life there gets wild. And so that's another thing that my Republican orbital commandos have to contend with, is the planet itself.
So man versus man, man versus nature.
And man versus Xenos.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost call man versus Xenos still man versus nature, because they come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so for those of you that don't know, the Gauss rifle is a rifle that's they use it a lot of sci-fi, but the Gauss rifle, Gauss cannon, it operates on the physics of the Newton's cradle in magnets to propel a weapon, to propel a projectile. They have actually successfully built them, but it's the energy issue. So I mean, it's one of those things where sure, I mean, if you could stay, to an unending power source, sure, but it's just not practical.
Yep.
Which is the same issue with faster than light. It's the energy. The battery is the bottleneck. You'll see another technological revolution if you can cure the battery or cold fusion. But I have it on great authority that I've heard since the 1980s. Cold fusion is only 20 years away.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, they were supposed to do some kind of silicone battery that had like 10,000 times its standard capacity and could be made to the size of a CD. That's been, people have been saying that for 15 probably years, but I still haven't seen it function yet. So, well, yeah. But that was part of me, and forgive me, I can't quote it exactly. I tried to give about 800 years for all of this to develop. So we are a decent ways down the timeline.
Yeah, you're going to end up 800 years. You're still end up with a lot of really new republics, because before you get to FTL, you're going to have that era where starships are functional enough that you can send out generation ships.
Yep.
Because that's just the intermediate stage. You don't just go from walking to running a marathon. There is like stages, and the generational ship at some point is going to be one of those stages. It just doesn't make any sense to me not to, unless everyone literally just waits till the FTL, which I guess is possible. But I think at some point in time, we're going to have like stuff on, at least in our own solar system.
Yep. Well, and I went with that happening first. Atlas is from Mars. He is purely Martian. He lives in Samaria, growing up. There's lots of Conan jokes snuck in if you look for them, because he's Sumerian. Which Samaria is a real place on Mars. For those of you that don't know, it was actually named. That's what we named it. I definitely went with that pattern. I skipped the generational ships, and I'll tell you why. Because I think you're very familiar, probably, with Galaxy's Edge, yes. And the Savages. And I didn't want to rip that idea off, even though it's absolutely dope. And if anybody at Galaxy's Edge see this, I want to write a Savage story. Like absolutely 100%. But I didn't want to copy that, and it's absolutely terrifying. For people not familiar with that, in the Galaxy's Edge series, the Savages were sent out first in generational ships that might take thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years, to reach some of the places they were trying to get to, and they were stuck in the cold, dark of space on their own that entire time. And these are giant ships with tons of resources, but over that time, it's virtually impossible to plan for everything or to take enough resources. So the Savages evolve by themselves for thousands of years as little micro worlds, and some of them show up and are drastically different from humanity, because humanity eventually did figure out faster than light travel and beat them out to the rest of the galaxy.
Yeah. I think they don't become savages until they go crazy in that lore, but I don't think you necessarily have to go crazy either. Although, I mean, one thinking is before we do the generational ships, we're going to end up with some sort of cryogenic freezing. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we're ever going to solve that one, because the problem is when you go to thaw them out, things explode and the ice cracks and whatever, and that's really bad to have your body fall back with holes in it, or missing chunks. That'd probably be a bad thing if your kidneys suddenly just crumbled up at your feet. But if you can cryo freeze people suddenly. Generation ships, they're not even generation ships. You're just going to sleep for generations and then wake up. So there's a lot of interesting ways to do that. I actually suspect, and I did this in one of my universes as kind of a joke, but the first thing that's really it's not going to be Daddy Musk that gets us to Mars. It's going to be like the Real Housewives of the Moon kind of thing. Like that seems to be like pop culture pushes development, because, all the Real Housewives, like it's going to be reality TV that's going to do it.
That's terrifying, but probably true.
But I don't know, just the way our culture is going, I just we don't take ourselves seriously anymore when it comes to science. So anyway, all right. So you've got this universe created. You took it 800 years in the future. How many polities exist? Is it like a lot of them, or is it just one or two main ones?
So the Republic is expanding, and it does have colonies all throughout. So basically, there's our three main superpowers on Earth, right? So we've got the USA, we've got Russia and China, and there's kind of a war and then an exchange on Earth. So one of the big concepts that was important to me is that, at least in the modern world, aside from a very few small places, there's no frontier anymore. And so the people, the wild men and women that want to find a frontier that don't fit into a civilized standing society, they don't really have a lot of places to go anymore. Some of them do well in the military. Some of them, become sailors or navigators. They find some kind of place, but those free-spirited people, they don't really have much of anywhere left to go. So there's kind of a cultural exchange that happens, that everybody says, hey, I'm going this way. Well, I'm going this way. Well, I'm going this way. And those three superpowers, they split off and they send people all in different galactic directions. And so I won't put an exact number on the colonies. I like maintaining that mystery. But there are plenty of places outside of our galaxy that are fully developed, that are lively, burgeoning planets that have solid civilizations. And on top of that, the Marcillians are expanding as well. They've gone out, and they are not the only alien species either. They go out and they make changes, and they pick these planets. Water is the big contention between the humans and the Marcillians, because it's a good water planet is hard to find, especially one that you can terraform with minimal effort. Another big thing I went with was genetic manipulation. Genetic manipulation is big in the Children of Fire universe. Kind of playing off CRISPR and some of the technologies that we have now. And it looks like clearly in probably the next 20 to 30 years, someone's really going to start messing with that. May not be the US, may not be legal, but someone is going to start trying to make super babies at some point. So I went with that too.
I mean, we've kind of already saw some of that. A couple of years ago, a Chinese doctor used CRISPR to try to alter genes to create babies without telling the parents that he was doing it, to try to make it resistant to, I think it was AIDS. And it's the babies would be old enough now that we might get something out of it, but the government quickly shut it down because China was like, we did not authorize this. Yep. And so I imagine he disappeared, and his parents or his family had to pay for the bullet that killed him, because that's kind of how things go over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that we're not that far from the technology now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so I really leaned in heavy to that. The Marines in my universe are massive. And they're made that way. They're chosen for that. They volunteer. There's a test that they can take, and they can choose if they want to, and they all end up 8 foot tall. They all end up just being huge, just nightmares on the battlefield, and that's what they're built for. They're built to be giant, insane shock troopers that all shoulder fire belt feds. Big inspiration from John Basilone for any military nerds out there.
Have you heard of Dr. Chris Renor?
Not off the top of my head.
So Dr. Chris Renor, he is a doctor, I think, of the skeleton. Like, that's his focus. I was getting his name, and that's why you heard the noise in the background. It popped up "You're at my channel, subscribe" little video. Dr. Chris Renor, I'll put his name and his link in there. He is a medical doctor that said, I'm a nerd. Let me see, is it possible to do like what the Halo did with the Spartans?
Yeah.
Is it possible to do what Warhammer 40K did with Space Marines? He basically breaks down the science of what it would take to make that happen. in some of his videos. Like he does a whole bunch of other things. Like he basically applies his medical knowledge to pop culture and kind of just looks at it for fun because, just because he's a doctor doesn't mean he can be a nerd too. And so it's definitely really interesting when you realize like all it takes is one or two unethical doctors, and we're not that far from some of this.
No, it's coming. Somebody's going to do it eventually.
I mean, it's gonna get interesting to see what that happens. So I don't know that you're going to get the medical, like the height thing happening. That could also happen. Have you seen? I'm sure you've seen S.A. Corey. I think James A. Corey, whatever, the guy that did The Expanse. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when they had the belters, they got taller because of the lack of gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That actually is not too unrealistic because the gravity and the weather where you're at is going to affect development, and you're going to end up seeing some genetic drift to the point where at a certain point in time, like, are they still human or are they something else? It's going to happen when you go to alien planets.
Yeah, well, and that's another big theme I think science fiction is going to increasingly have to address, is what being human means. That was a really cool thing about the Galaxy's Edge is once we part ways from this planet and we all go our separate directions, or we all separate ourselves, and things like relativity of time kick in, you're going to leave and come back different if you ever come back at all. And if you run into each other 10,000 years later and you've grown up in different gravity and you've genetically modified yourselves in different ways, you are not going to look like your grandparents even did. That's not going to be the same. We're not all going to be Homo sapiens sapiens anymore. We're going to be something very different. And that's going to create interesting conflict, in my opinion.
And the other thing you've got to look at when you're talking near future, everyone assumes alien life means sentient life. And I'm sorry, if you find an amoeba on another planet, that's alien. And I suspect that in our lifetime we'll find proof of that. They're looking at Europa in the water. They're looking at some of the thermal vents on various planets. I suspect. And then the other part is we assumed for so long that we had to have carbon-based life forms. But then they found sulfur-based life forms in the yellow flats that were Yellowstone in the sulfur flats that were existing. Yep. And I don't know if that would lead to complex life. Who's to say? But the idea that we would narrow that is interesting, because that means if you look at the Fermi paradox, because we've narrowed our window of what we define life as, we could have excluded stuff that legitimately had life on it because it didn't meet the criteria we set.
Yep.
And that's going to change things too. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, this is the important question everyone wants to know. Are you ready?
Sure.
Was the first baby born on Mars named Marvin?
That's a fantastic question. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't planned it out that far, but I think it might have to be that way just for the joke at this point. Once I finally do put that down on paper somewhere. I haven't actually done Mars yet. Mars for me is going to be a big undertaking. That's a novel in and of itself. I have been working on the direct sequel to Children of Fire. And I've been working on a couple other short stories that kind of take you to other characters and other planets across the galaxy. I wanted to show off that genetic manipulation. We've answered the dinosaur question on here before. I really wanted to dive into dinosaurs. And so that's what one of the novellas is about, is introducing some of the fun consequences of genetic manipulation and how maybe life is going to find a way in my own universe.
Yeah, I don't think dinosaur-like creatures are that far-fetched that they could happen on other planets. Like, I don't know that you're going to get them to be necessarily intelligent, but the idea that we might get to a planet that's at that stage of development, I don't think that's that far-fetched.
Yeah. Well, I figured we would make our own long before we find anything like that. Once you get how can I put this? It's very hard for people that are 1,000 miles away to control everything that you do, no matter how hard they try. There's a reason that the IRS still chases bootleggers in the mountains to this day. It's because you can't stop the signal. You can't control it. So once that kind of technology develops and it gets out, there's going to be somebody under a mountain somewhere that decides, hey, why don't we make a dinosaur?
Yeah, and like I said, it's gonna be an interesting time to see how that plays out. Now, when you have the dinosaurs in your world, are they going to be sentient, or are they just going to be beasts of burden, just animals that are kind of populating a planet? How do you think you want to use them?
A little bit of everything. A little bit of everything. So to the next short story that you all will probably see in the Children of Fire universe is called Apex. And it is literally about Strongjaw, who's a tyrannosaur, and it is from his perspective. It is his emergence into this world that makes no sense. I really wanted to challenge myself and write from the perspective of an inhuman. And I thought that, our world's most legendary apex predator might be a fun way to do that. So that'll be coming at some point. I think I'm going to end up submitting that to Canon for the High Caliber Awards, but we'll see how things go. But that's on the way. So he, once that technology develops and it's proven viable and they live and they breathe, you're going to see them in battle. You're going to see them change all kinds of things. I have another short story that I call Auric High, based off of the Aurics, who were kind of the wild ancestors of modern cattle, just a lot bigger and a lot meaner. And the entire planet in the Gaussian Republic is centered around providing beef to, 5 or 6 other planets around them. And so you have cowboys that are basically doing a cattle drive, but it's all genetically modified. They ride giant wolves because giant wolves would be a lot better at that job and keeping all the cattle in line and keeping them safe. They're pheromone bonded to their riders. There's giant cattle. There's giant lab experiments that escaped and attack them on the plains and all kinds of other craziness that's fun to deal with.
So, do you see this being a universe that's a collection of one-offs? Or are you going to tell some overarching tale in this universe?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Atlas's story, the original Children of Fire, will absolutely get a sequel. That is a novel I have already started working on. It's called Funeral Bell. If you, for any of you music nerds out there, all of the main stories in Children of Fire's universe, they're all named after songs. So that's something that you'll see happen over and over again. But yeah, we're going to learn more about Atlas and what he wants to do, and his past, what happens with him in Corsica. That'll all happen.
Okay. So obviously you don't want to give out too much before the series launches because you don't want to give spoilers or lock yourself in because sometimes stuff changes as you write.
Right.
So what's the overall theme you want for this universe as we bring this puppy to a close?
I'm going to try and continue the best I can to make this something that addresses the, I don't want to call it the soldier's struggle, but that's kind of the whole point, is that there's things that have to be done, and there's the men that are capable of doing them. But we often use and use them until they're beat to pieces, or they finally get to retire. And when they do, they come home, and it is a very difficult thing to adjust to. And I don't think that's going to change, even as we spread out into the stars in the universe. So I'm going to continue and try and make this something that is both emotionally impactful and fun, with lots of action and lots of as much of real world as I can put into it as far as the fighting is concerned without ruining stories. I stole battle tactics from the Marines Handbook. I stole battle tactics from Famous Battles. I talked about John Bassett-Malone, and there's literally a character that shoulder mounts an A-15 and goes to work just like he did in the Isles in World War II. There's all kinds of amazing real life people that I can pay homage to, and I'm going to try and keep that rolling. And of course, as I told you, I love revenge tales, and Atlas, once you read the story, will have a very important person that he has to take vengeance for, and that will be a main theme as well.
Okay, and if they wanted to follow you, find out more about this universe as you develop it, where do they do that at?
My website is outlawauthor.com. You can find pretty much all of my other socials there. My Instagram is my full name, Jesse James Fain. Feel free to add me, jump in on there. I give updates there all the time. And if you're interested in little short stories and behind the scenes and want to know more about all of my universes, I have a Substack as well. That'll be in the show notes and everything like that. And you'll be able to find me there. I used to do free shorts on Reddit. The free shorts on Reddit are probably coming to a close, and they're going to move over to the Substack so that you can just get them in your email and read them whenever you want to.
Okay. This is the part of the introduction, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your introduction. Closing. Please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So if you read Contested Landing and find his short story, Children of Fire, and you really dig it, leave a review on Amazon. Tell your friends. Shout it out on YouTube, BookTube, Twitter, TikTok. I don't care. Go to all the places and tell them, hey, I really like this story in this book, and encourage them to buy it too. And with that, you can find us on our Linktree at linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people, we have Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitters, and the emails for all the shenanigans. Send them her way. We have our website. It's a bunch of gobbledygook. So just use the link tree, click on our website link, or you can find us over on Spotify's website for as little as 99 cents a month. When you get there, you can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce. We appreciate your patronage. And unfortunately, if you've been following the internet drama, it's about to get more expensive to produce these because StreamYards, which is who we record all this through, is about to make it 5 times more expensive to use their platform. So we are looking for alternatives. There might be some delay in production for season 5, which would be January. But yeah, so every little bit helps, and we appreciate your patronage. You can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comments section this for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-host duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until it pours out of their ears, people, and you don't want to see that. Well, maybe you do, and we'll film it and sell that to you too. Anyway, if you want to buy some of that coffee brand coffee for yourself, use the link in the show notes. Use the code podcast grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. It is not a drop shipping company. They are an American company where they're roasted here, shipped here, packaged here, whole 9 yards. It's an American company, so you're shopping local when you shop with Coffee Brand Coffee, and you help keep the lights on. So, it's like I said, a win-win. And if you do that, it's delicious. Stabby and I are probably our best customer right now. They tell you when you're a drug dealer not to buy your own product, but we didn't listen. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time. We'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and other things that go boom. And with that, we are out. Thanks for coming on, Jesse. This was fun.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun, too.
All right. And now we hope to have you back when the books come out.
Yeah, absolutely. I will let